love, harmony, free sex, drugs. The ideals of the 60s look set to change the world forever. Life didn't get better than this. But on a hot August night in 1969, one of the most gruesome murders occurred in Los Angeles, marking the end of the dream. Charles Manson's so-called cult family entered the house and brutally slaughtered its occupants, even going so far as to write slogans on the wall in their own blood.
Police identified one of the bodies as heavily pregnant Sharon Tate, wife of film director Roman Polanski. Another, Jay Sebring, was a well-known Hollywood drug dealer.
Many myths have surfaced over the years. The strangest suggest that those killed were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that Manson was seeking revenge on record producer Terry Melcher, the son of Doris Day, who had recently vacated the property. Add to the equation Dennis Wilson, the drummer with the Beach Boys, who on the surface were the nation's favourite clean-cut apple pie band, and you have one pretty weird tale. Surfing USA.
Terry Melcher was in-house producer at Columbia Records. He was the man who made Mr. Tambourine Man with the Birds.
Terry was somewhat of a frustrated rock star. I mean, he had done a little bit of recording with Bruce Johnson, who became a Beach Boy. He got involved with producing some groups and had a tremendous talent for producing, and definitely a tremendous success.
And he was Doris Day's son as well, so he was a bit of a linchpin on the whole Californian scene. Now, he was also a very good friend with Dennis.
There he is, the hard-working drummer Denny Wilson. Sing a song.
Dennis was the sex symbol of the Beach Boys. I mean, he was the guy basically who the girls screamed for.
Dennis was the only one in the group that, resembled what we in a way think of a kind of rock and roll attitude. He was wild and dangerous.
It was all about music and sex. Dennis and Terry had a little club called the Golden Penetrators.
The Golden Penetrators was basically an unofficial men's club between Terry Melcher and Dennis. Legend has it that they scrawled this on this van and they'd go around trawling the strip looking for sort of young women to take back and have their way with. They were very tight buddies, basically. Dennis first hooked up with Charles Manson in the late spring of 1968.
He picked up a girl hitchhiking on the road back to LA.
He would have instantly told the hitchhiking girl, "You know who I am, I'm Dennis of the Beach Boys."
Dennis had taken her back to his house, and she was one of Manson's family.
She would have told Charlie, "Hey, you won't believe who just picked me up hitchhiking was one of the Beach Boys." And Charlie went, "Oh, here, I'm gonna meet me a Beach Boy."
They hit it off fabulously.
So fabulously that Charlie and the family moved into Dennis's, and the house became party central 24/7.
Dennis's house was a big party house. People were buying drugs there.
A lot of girls, drugs, and, wild behavior.
Dennis would have introduced Charlie to everybody because he did think, he was this guy who was supplying him with all these girls, with all these drugs, and he writes songs as well.
There's a time for living.
First in line to meet Dennis's new housemate was fellow Golden Penetrator Terry Melcher, who was suitably impressed with the drug-dealing singer-songwriter.
He was also an A&R guy as well, so part of Terry's job would be to go out and find new talent.
Ah, those feelings real. Look at your game, girl.
It was very obvious to Manson that if you wanted to get your message across, or even you wanted millions of people to idolize you, you would have to do it through rock star.
Brother Records was really like the Beach Boys version of the Apple label, and Dennis thought that Charles Manson would be a viable artist to put on Brother Records.
One day I got a call from the Beach Boys manager. He wanted me to stay real late and record a friend of Dennis's. Of course, nobody knew anything about Charles Manson at that time, except that he was more or less a street musician, and there certainly were a lot of those.
Clang, bang, clang.
So I stayed late one night and recorded Charles.
They put me in a cell.
I guess we were there 3 or 4 nights until I called it quits. I didn't like being alone with this guy.
9 other men in that cell with me.
He had a strange look in his eyes, and he was smelly. He needed a bath. That was really the reason I didn't like being around him, because he stunk.
Early in the morning at the crack of dawn.
Disharmony prevailed not only in the studio, as around at Dennis's house, the endless partying was winding down.
When the lease came up at the Sunset Boulevard house, Dennis realised that he was basically being divulged of money.
They sold off his clothes, and they sold his record collection, and one of the family wrote off his red Ferrari.
The band's management had to kick Manson off of the property. After this, between 68 and 69, Manson and the family, they all went to a Spahn ranch in the desert.
Pretty, pretty girl.
Living conditions there were unbelievably harsh.
With Manson and the family holed up at the ranch, Dennis and the Beach Boys entered the studio to record their new long player, 2020. It included a new track, Never Learn Not to Love, a reworked and renamed version of a song written and demoed by Charles Manson as Cease to Exist.
Cease to exist. Just come and say you love me.
The record didn't do very well. Manson blamed that on the fact that they changed the lyrics.
One of his dictums was, "You do not change the lyrics to my tunes." So the relationship was very, very strained.
Charlie had once given Dennis a bullet because Dennis had changed the lyrics to one of his songs.
Never learn not to love me.
After this, Dennis was avoiding Charlie, basically. The main connection after that was with Terry, who was still trying to pursue Charlie.
Love and understand.
Apparently, Melcher had been out to the ranch to hear Manson perform new songs. It was, by all accounts, a mess. Melcher didn't want to take things any further with Manson, but like most LA music and movie professionals, saying no straight out was problematic. He smiled, nodded, and left.
Never learn not to love me.
You hear images of Manson becoming like this caged animal. Whether he wanted to be a musician, whether he wanted influence over people, the frustration started to boil over into confusion and anger and everything else. So I think he would have been a fairly psychotic person to be around.
August the 9th was the night of the murders at 10,050 Cielo Drive, the house Melcher had vacated 6 months previous. Charles Manson was later arrested for the murders.
His picture was on the front page of the newspaper, and I mean, it just shook me to the bone.
I watched the news on morning TV. I could hardly believe that this guy that I sat in the studio with was being charged with murdering all these people in a gruesome way.
It was here, at a homemade cowboy-style ranch, that the plot was probably made for the murder of actress Sharon Tate and her friends. I asked the ranch manager, Ruby Pearl, what she thought of them.
He was always interested in music. That's the sole interest of Charlie Manson. He sat on the rock and played guitar. He'd get up and walk around, and he'd get a pencil and paper and go and write some music. And everywhere he went, some of the girls kind of followed him and laughed and talked and sang.
You've painted a very poetic picture of this community. How do you relate this to one of America's most bizarre murders?
The only thing I can say to that is that after their music fell through, they became more morbid and started thinking of other lines.
Were they taking drugs, do you know?
We never could prove it, but off and on we heard they were. It's the only thing that could have cracked their mind.
The myth runs that Terry had promised this contract to Charlie and that he had not come through with it.
Charles got it in his mind that everybody was letting him down. He had been lied to, his words, and Being the psychotic that he is, he conceived this idea of revenge.
And the story went that when that happened, he then went looking for Melcher, and that was when he discovered the Tate people in there and murdered them instead of Melcher.
Your home is where you're happy.
I don't think that there's any possibility that they really believed that Terry was still in the house.
Your home is where you can be.
There was a telescope of Terry's was stolen from his patio. Somebody had seen it out at the ranch, so they pretty much knew where Terry was now living.
Terry Melcher moved out of Cielo Drive in about November 1968. Roman Polanski moved in February 1969. In that time, Tex Watson, who was one of the killers, was rumoured to have actually been staying at Cielo Drive. Charles Manson most likely would have known at that point that Terry Melcher had moved out of the house.
'Cause you're strong in your mind.
It was probably more likely something to do with drugs.
My cousin is Joanna Pettit, who was Sharon Tate's best friend, and she always maintained, you know, it's not Manson, it's some drug deal that they're involved in, or some sex thing.
It's very unlikely that the murder was anything to do with a broken contract over a record, when you've got two of the biggest drug dealers to Hollywood at that house at that time.
You'll never be alone.